Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the comic Kingsman, The Secret Service. That's right, the comic that was
hmm
adapted as the Matthew Vaughn movie, Kingsman, The Secret Service. And we'll be talking all about the comic and how it compares to the movie in a little bit. So stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back. Or if this is your first time, welcome. This is the
hmm
Cultured Pull List, part of the Cultured Nerd Podcast Network, also called the Cultured Universe.
Yep.
This weekend, the new Matthew Vaughn movie Argylle has
hmm
come out, and in honor of that, kind of wanted to go back to one of his older movies and the comic that kind of inspired it. It's kind of this is a Mark Millar book, so it's part of
Yeah.
like the Millar world.
hmm
And what's really interesting about Mark Millar is pretty much like it seems like almost as soon as he writes books, they like get optioned for like movies and stuff. And
Yeah.
like with Kick Ass, Mark Millar and Matthew Vaughn worked together on Kick Ass, and Matthew
hmm
Vaughn basically worked on adapting the movie pretty much as Miller was writing the book.
Right.
This is a little different. This is just kind of an adaptation of Miller's book, but Matthew Vaughn was, I guess, involved in the writing
Yeah.
process. Like, I really don't know to what extent Miller was or Vaughn was involved in the
hmm
writing. I couldn't find like that info for the life of me, but when this book was first published, it was just called The Secret Service. Then
Right.
after the movie came out, it was retitled Kingsman, and then
hmm
the preceding books were also called Kingsman. And after the movie came out, Matthew Vaughn was credited as the co-plotter of
Right.
Kingsman. But like I couldn't really find any info on how much that really means exactly.
hmm
But it was still pretty interesting. Oh yeah, I forgot to
Yeah.
put that up. Yeah, so there, and also Dave Gibbons is the artist for this book, and he's probably most famous for doing the art for Watchmen.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just get right into the comic here. So Kingsman: The Secret Service, written by Mark Millar with art by Dave Gibbons, and Matthew Vaughn was the co-plotter. Inks by Dave Gibbons and Andy Lanning. The colorist is Angus McKee. And letterers are Dave Gibbons and Angus McKee. So the story starts out with the actor Mark Hamill being held against his will in this Swiss cabin out, and um, he's not really told why he's there. But before his captors can really do anything to him, he's rescued by a British Secret Service agent who kills his captors and escapes with him on a snowmobile. And as they make their getaway, they're pursued and they ride off of a cliff. And the Secret Service agent has a parachute that ends up not deploying. So, yeah, the Secret Service agent and Mark Hamill end up plunging to their deaths. So then we are introduced to the main character of the story, Gary London. He's nicknamed Eggsy, but pretty much the only one who calls him Eggsy are like his friends and a few like kids in the neighborhood. But Eggsy's mom is in a relationship with this really nice guy named Dean. And he's so nice that he has Eggsy's kid brother roll blunts for him, and yeah, just yells in his mom's face and physically assaults them. He just all around a great guy. But Eggsy, Gary, whatever. I guess I'm gonna call him Gary because the story calls him Gary more often. But Gary acts out a lot. He gets in trouble with the law a lot. So on this particular night, he steals a car and ends up being pursued by the police and soon crashes and gets arrested. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Gary's uncle, Jack London, and Jack is meeting with this guy, Giles, who seems to be his boss in the Secret Service, and he tells Jack that there's this rash of like celebrity kidnappings going on, and they're not really sure what's going on, but they're assigning Jack to the case. But then Jack gets a text from his sister, Gary's mom, that Gary is in prison and needs Jack's help. So Jack goes down to the police station and he begrudgingly uses his Secret Service clearance to get Gary out of prison. So then Jack takes Gary home, but he makes a call to some friends in the Secret Service to get Gary into the Secret Service training academy. Next, we see this public like ceremony on the beach in Hawaii with a bunch of couples being married at the same time. We're also introduced to the main antagonist of the story, Dr. James Arnold. He's this young tech mogul, and he uses this uh, machine he's made that emits a frequency that causes people to act out violently. And so he uses his machine on the newlyweds, and they all murder each other. And ironically, Arnold looks away and doesn't actually want to watch the carnage that he caused. Meanwhile, Jack and Eggsy are at a downtown pub, and or not, yeah, well, like downtown for their neighborhood. And this is actually the neighborhood that Jack and his sister grew up in, but he was able to get out and eventually join the Secret Service, while his sister, Gary's mom, stayed there in South London in that town. And Jack explains to Gary that he's actually a Secret Service agent. This whole time, he told everyone that he was like a fraud inspector or something. And he shows Gary his security card and tells him that he got Gary a place in the Secret Service Academy. And while they're talking, this punk shows up and picks a fight with Jack, basically. And Jack pretty easily beats up this thug and his buddies. And Gary ends up agreeing to go to the academy, and Jack says that he'll pick Gary up the next day. Meanwhile, Giles and the Secret Service find the wedding massacre, and Giles talks to Jack on this big screen in like downtown London, but they have to use these special glasses to see each other. It's kind of weird, but kind of interesting. And Giles tells Jack that they believe the Secret Service, the higher ups at the Secret Service, believe that the Chinese government, is the one kidnapping all these celebrities. And he's tasked Jack with investigating it. So the next day, Jack picks up Gary, and Gary says goodbye to his mom and little brother. And Jack takes Gary to the Secret Service Academy, where Gary's introduced to his instructor, Greaves, and he's shown all of the cool weapons and tech and gadgets that the Secret Service has. So Jack leaves Gary for his training, which is going to last 3 years. And he goes to the Chinese government building, I guess, headquarters in Beijing, and tries to find any information on the kidnapped celebrities. But he's quickly found out, and he is able to make his escape with some Secret Service agent gadgets as well as his souped-up car. Meanwhile, we see James Arnold is attending a presentation by this professor, this scientist, and his whole theory is basically that there's like too many people on the planet, basically, and the Earth is just eventually going to unleash these extinction level events to kind of treat humanity as a virus, basically. Like the Earth is going to unleash an immune system response, and this is kind of what propels James Arnold to do what he's doing. He's trying to cull the population to stop these events, I guess. And then we see Greaves and Giles talking about Gary's progress in the program, and he's exceeding in pretty much all his tests, but Greaves is concerned that really his entire education seems to come mainly from video games and movies. So he doesn't really seem to have the higher class education that most of the other agents have, as well as he has a criminal record. But then we see Gary and his fellow classmate Hugo being sent on one of their later missions. It's their first assassination mission, and they've basically been sent to go kill a smaller group of drug dealers. And when they show up, one of the dealers actually recognizes Gary and calls him Eggsy, but Hugo shoots him, but then Hugo himself is shot, and Gary takes out the remainder of the drug dealers, saving himself and Hugo, and then he gets them out of there. Their next big test is the top recruits are sent to basically pick up girls at this club, and it's basically a test of um, how convincing they can be, and how basically training for being undercover. And they all the recruits show up in nice suits, but Gary shows up in like this South London kind of thug outfit that he thinks is fancy, and the other guys make fun of him. And Eggsy's also unable to pick up women at this club, and he overhears the other guys talking bad about him, but basically like that he can't hack it and that he doesn't belong there. So Gary ends up leaving the club, leaving the test, and goes and steals his Uncle Jack's car from the Secret Service headquarters, and he takes it back to his neighborhood in South London, and picks up his friends for a joyride.
So we pick up the next day. Obviously, Jack's not super impressed with the previous night, and we do have a bit of a flashback. They're chasing the cops, and apparently in the when they hotwired it, they kind of switched the gadgets around. So instead of like spilling oil on the ground, they launched a missile into, I'm not exactly sure what building it is, but they launched the missile into one of the buildings and it caused like a bunch of damage. And so basically, Jack is like, I'll give you like one more chance, but you have to like, they're not going to let you back into the academy. So you're going to have to be like my apprentice, basically. And he's like, yeah, sure. So then he gasses him and he's like, okay, so we speed ran you to like the final exam of like the graduation. So like, this is what you do after 3 years at the academy. So basically they drop you in, I believe it's South Africa with nothing. And you have to get back to English soil within 24 hours.
Yeah, it was South America. I think it was
South
Colombia.
America.
Yeah. When I first read it, I read South Africa, but then I went back. It's like, it says Colombia. That doesn't make any. Yeah,
No,
it's
South
South
America.
America. Yeah.
That makes more sense. It's further away than South Africa.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's harder harder to get back.
Right. So then he gets attacked by the police, but then he takes advantage of it and he steals their clothes, and then he goes to, because he's supposed to go to somebody's house and get a plane ticket. That's how he gets home. But it's actually the plane ticket's at a drug dealer's house. So there's a bunch of shots fired, and then but he basically just steals a bunch of guns from the cops, and then basically like arrests the drug dealer and steals his plane. And so he gets home without even using the plane ticket at all. So now he is Jack's apprentice, and there's like this whole suit up montage, and this is what he looks like at the end. And to celebrate his graduation, his mom is setting up a bunch of balloons, and stepdad's not too. What's his name? The stepdad's name?
Dean.
Yeah. Dean's not super impressed, and you can tell he's evil because he has the Osborne haircut in that panel. So yeah, we'll go back to what he does later, but this is basically more. They figure out who the villain is, James Arnold, and like, okay, because they used like, they basically everyone who was kidnapped, or kind of like, there's this environmentalist guy, a bunch of actors, and all these weird guys, and then they were able to like find out the pattern is like this guy's search history, and so like they're able to like track it down to this like millionaire who's like 24, and he's just kind of a weird nerd.
Yeah.
Anyway, we cut back to Gary's house, and like it's all in ruins, and like his mom's got a black eye and stuff. So then Gary goes to the bar, and then he beats up Dean, but then Dean's friends show up and they're like, we're gonna beat him up, we're gonna kill you. But then he does this thing where like conveniently it only paralyzes them, and then so he can beat him up.
Yeah.
And then he gives his mom a new flat, and they're all happy. And then Gary and Jack, they go to so they know who the guy is, James Arnold, and so they tracking his girlfriend Ambrosia, I believe her name is, to go shopping one last time before the world ends. And Jack's like, trust me, I'll go and seduce her. I just kind of watch and learn, and he successfully does it. And then they're talking, and he kind of gets the plan from her, all the details, and this is supposed to be Ridley Scott, which I think is really funny.
Yeah, that was really funny. All the celebrity cameos were pretty funny.
Yeah. And so Gary was supposed to trail Arnold, but Arnold did not show up to meet with Ridley Scott. And Uncle Jack gets, if you've seen Saw 2, you kind of can figure out what's going on here. So anyway, he gets killed, and then James walks in on his girlfriend cheating on him, and then because Jack had the glasses on the entire time during the whole encounter, we'll just say, and so Gary was able to see it, and so he also obviously saw his death as well. And then I forget who this guy is.
Greaves, he's the instructor at the academy.
Yeah. So they're talking, they're having kind of like a memorial drink, and then he was like, by the way, I'm working for James, and I want to take you with me. And he's like, no, I don't want that. And so he's like, okay, well then I poisoned your shot, and it's like, you're gonna die now. He's like, actually, no, I didn't even drink it, so you're gonna actually die. So yeah. And then he during this whole monologue, he mentions that like the whole organization is compromised. And so he's like, instead of, I'll just go from the bottom up and just take all the new recruits there instead. So the airplane, the private jet that Greaves had already had the navigation into Arnold's base. And so they just kind of flew there. And their plan basically is to fly in. So they crash an airplane into the base while the recruits kind of are storming in through so the airplane's going to crash as like a diversion, and they're going to kind of storm through the back while this guy up here is going to shoot the satellite that's going to emit the signal. So the airplane crashes into it. They storm in. They're able to shoot the guards and free the celebrities. And I think this is James Brosnan, one of the James Bonds.
Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce. Why did I say James? It's Pierce.
Mix of James Bond and Pierce Brosnan.
Right. Pierce Bond.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so at this point, Ambrosia's like totally disillusioned with it, so she's got a gun, and there was this moment back here that's actually comes back later. Let me see. Yeah, so he's talking to one of his. So a lot of the recruits in Arnold's army are like disabled spies, pretty much. So this one is an amputee, and he calls him Gazelle. And he's like, I don't appreciate that, dude. And so that comes back later. I just wanted to mention that. So yeah, all the prisoners have weapons, and Eggsy gets attacked by Gazelle. Gary gets attacked by Gazelle, and while they're fighting, two guys are going into the server and trying to find the specific machine that's going to give out the signal. Ambrosia attacks Arnold, but she dies, and he calls this guy Cyclops. It's like it's funny because, like, I mean, his plan may or may not be, right or wrong, but it's like he's ableist, so obviously he's bad.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then he's able to kill Gazelle with a laser pen, and then all the celebrities basically take the guards hostage. I think it's Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
And then, but the signal's about to go off, and that guy in the hot air balloon couldn't find the satellite, so it's going to go off. But everyone starts kissing instead. Like what happened? So the guys in the server were able to like change the signal. So instead of killing each other, everyone just starts making out. And there's just a couple of things that I thought were so funny, like the
Yeah.
cops making out's great. There's this scene in the hospital is great. Yeah, good stuff. So then uh, he he uh, he kills James Arnold, and then there's a funeral scene which I'm not going to go over, but it kind of ends with earlier on in the story they mentioned how they save the world like all the time, but no one really knows about it. So what Jack would do is he'd always take the newspaper from the next day because it didn't say anything about him. That means he's doing his job right. So so Gary frames the newspaper from that day, and it's kind of a memorial for that. And the comic ends with him going into like a secret parking garage, and he's getting another mission for something in Moscow.
Yeah, that is Kingsman: The Secret Service. What did you think?
Um, it was okay. I feel like it wasn't quite as. So you mentioned the art was by the same guy who did The Watchmen, and I feel like that is kind of at odds with Matthew Vaughn's writing style because the art is very
Mark Millar.
Mark Millar. Yeah, Mark Millar. What did I say?
Matthew Vaughn.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess he co-plotted it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, close. Yeah.
It's kind of at odds with the writing style because in Watchmen
Yeah.
it's very subdued, but
Yeah.
Mark Millar is very in your face, like we saw with Kick-Ass.
Yeah.
So I feel like it doesn't really it's kind of at odds with itself, and
That's fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It had some good moments.
I feel like the art reminded me slightly just more of the character designs of the boys, even though it's
Yeah,
not the same.
I did pick that up. Yeah,
But it does kind of miss like the flair of not only Mark Millar's
Mhm.
writing, but I think Matthew Vaughn's style. Like obviously the book came first, but I
Right.
feel like the movie has a lot more style to it
Yes, it
than the
does.
book does,
Mhm.
which is kind of interesting. I'm assuming a lot of that came from Vaughn and his
Right.
style. But yeah, I thought it was I mean, obviously first time reading this, it was kind of weird coming to it after like, I've seen the movie several times.
Mhm.
A lot of things were different. It felt a lot more normal. I mean, like it didn't feel as much of a like it wasn't as stylized, I
Yes.
guess, as the movie.
Mhm.
Felt a lot more just kind of like a straightforward like spy story.
Mhm.
I thought it was interesting. I thought there were some things I really liked that I thought were really good. Like I did like all the celebrity cameos. I thought that was funny.
Mhm. Mhm.
And at the end, the way all the celebrities are like fighting back against Arnold's men and stuff was pretty fun.
Right.
Um, I thought that I did find some of the stuff interesting, like how he just sort of dropped Gary off in Colombia. I was like, "Find your way back." I
Right.
thought that was kind of funny, but I also thought it was kind of um, convenient that he just sort of Gary just kind of like
Mhm.
the cartel um, boss's mansion was supposed to be like an impenetrable fortress, but then
Right.
Eggsy just kind of says to the cop like, "Oh, do you have any machine guns?" He's like, "Yeah, I've got a bunch." And he just comes back with machine guns
Right.
and kills everybody.
Right.
Like, oh,
Right.
well, that's kind of convenient. um, and I feel like the characters were not super interesting. Besides, like I
Yeah.
thought Gary and Jack were fine. And I really did like their like uncle nephew relationship, and
Mhm.
I did like the whole story of Jack being a guy from the same place, like in South London, kind of like a lower class
Mhm.
area, but he was able to get out, and for a while he just kind of was living for himself, but then he comes back, he helps bring Gary out of that life, and they help Gary's mom. I thought
Mhm.
all that was cool, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of. I didn't really care that much about most of the characters,
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
honest. But and I will say, I did find Jack's death surprising. I think because the comic's so different from the movie, I was just
Yeah.
expecting things to be completely different. And then when he actually died, I was like, "Oh, that
Hmm.
actually did happen in the comic." You know, I thought
Right.
I assumed at that point that that was just like a movie thing.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so yeah, it was all right. I definitely prefer the movie
Right.
overall. It was definitely, I feel like most of the changes the movie made were for the
Hmm.
better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of the movie, let's talk about some of the main differences from the
Hmm.
comic and the movie, which there are a lot.
Yep.
And
Yep.
yeah, it kind of makes me wonder how much influence Matthew Vaughn had on the original comic.
Hmm.
Because there are some things that are this, like there are even some details like with um how Jack, kept the news stories,
Yeah.
the Jack equivalent. Which, speaking of that, a completely different character, Harry Hart,
Hmm.
played by Colin Firth, not Gary's uncle. He knew Gary's father, who was also a Kingsman agent and died, saving his life. So he felt indebted to him. And then, very similar relationship, though, kind of like
Hmm.
mentor mentee kind of a
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of Eggsy, his name is Gary in the movie, but everybody calls him Eggsy like all the time. Whereas
Hmm.
in the book, at least in the first book, he's mostly referred to as Gary. Later on in the series, mostly he's called Eggsy, and his last name has changed from London, which is Jack's last name, to Unwin, which is the movie
Hmm.
name, I believe.
Okay.
So but besides that, Eggsy is honestly very similar in both the book and the
Hmm.
movies, I'd say.
Hmm.
Um, oh yeah, I will say like a big difference, like story wise, is the finale. Um, where in the finale of the movie, Eggsy just takes Roxy and
Hmm.
Merlin, because they're pretty much the only people left in Kingsman,
Right.
who haven't betrayed the Secret Service. But in the book, it's Eggsy just goes and brings like all the recruits from the school and everything,
Right. Right.
which like is kind of cool. It's kind of like more like an actual like assault, but I kind of prefer the more like covert, like one guy
Hmm.
going in kind of thing, from the movie. But yeah, continuing with the characters, um are yeah, well, first I kind of glossed over a huge thing. In the movie, the Secret Service is like a whole secret service like called Kingsman, and
Right.
it's like kind of they base their code names off of the Knights of the Round Table. Like the leader's Arthur, Harry Hart is Galahad, I think.
Yeah.
Um, there's Merlin and Lancelot, all those.
And I think in the movie, the Kingsman is kind of its own thing, whereas in the comic,
Yes,
it's more like associated with the British government.
right. In the yeah, yeah, I think they're like MI6 technically
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
comics, whereas in the
Yeah.
movie they're a separate entity, like from the government itself,
Hmm.
like separate from the government.
Right.
But yeah, so Arthur like doesn't exist in the comics. That character of Greaves in the comics is kind of a mix of Arthur and Merlin, because
Mm.
Merlin was the instructor in the comics or
Hmm.
in the movie,
Right.
and Greaves is the instructor in the comics, but Greaves betrays them like Arthur does in the
Hmm.
movie. Um, and then there's the main villain is completely different in the movie, played by
Yeah.
Sam Jackson. He's an original character, Valentine, and Gazelle is a woman instead of. It's kind of
Hmm.
funny in the
Hmm.
comic. Gazelle kind of looked like Sam Jackson a
Yeah.
little bit, but then and then Gazelle is Sophia Botella instead of a,
Hmm.
a bigger black guy.
Right.
Um, but there is a Dr. Arnold in the movie, but he's actually played by Mark Hamill,
Yeah,
and
and that's more the environmentalist instead of the
exactly
main antagonist. Yeah.
right, and he's the only guy I think that actually gets kidnapped in the movie. All the other
Mm.
people that Valentine has in like his inner circle like volunteered. I think he might have blackmailed some people, but they're all there of their own accord.
Okay. So, because I remember wasn't there like the princess in the cell.
That's true. Yeah, yeah,
So there
yeah,
was
yeah.
some
Because
people that got
because she
kidnapped.
wouldn't comply, but her like
Okay.
prime minister did or something. So
Okay.
he had her
Okay.
kid, yeah. But everyone else, I think, was like he got a bunch of world leaders and influential people to like side with him. And in the movie, there's like the whole thing where the people on his side have like I think a chip in their
Yeah.
head that
It makes them
protects them from the
immune.
signal.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so there's a lot of differences there. Also, there's Roxy in the movie.
Hmm.
She does not exist in the comic. In the comic, Eggsy's best like friend, who's like a pupil with him, is named Hugo.
Hmm.
Roxy seems to kind of take that role in the movie. But it's what's funny is there is actually a Hugo in the movie, as one of the recruits, but he doesn't really get any screen time. And speaking of the recruits, they're all competing for like the same spot in
Hmm.
the movie, whereas in the book they're just at the academy. They're all going to be like if they
Right.
pass, they're all going to be agents.
Hmm.
And one other big difference that I pulled up was the demonstration of the signal in the book. It's at that weird like group wedding in Hawaii.
Hmm.
Whereas in the movie, it's that like iconic
Yeah.
church massacre
Yeah.
scene, which is one of like the greatest action scenes in cinema,
Right.
in my opinion. So,
Right.
like, I'm really glad that they did what they did with that in the movie. Plus,
And
I gotta say the cast, like Colin Firth, is really good. Like just
yeah.
what they did with that character in the movie is awesome.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think that that's kind of that scene kind of is the main difference. There's also that scene at the bar is also a good example of it as well
Yeah,
because those 4 or 5 panels that I showed were kind of all that there was for that scene, but
yeah,
it's like Manners Maketh Man is also probably the second most iconic scene in the
yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And so I think that's probably the main difference is
Mm-hmm.
the focus of the more stylized action,
Yes,
whereas the book is more subdued.
yeah. And that's very Matthew Vaughn.
Yeah,
You get that in
yeah,
most of his movies, and I will say Argylle. There are a few scenes that are a lot like that too. Like that
mhm,
action is very like Matthew Vaughn. It's not as violent
yeah,
as Kingsman,
yeah,
but it's very stylized and like very very unique. It's really fun to watch. And yeah, like
yes,
you
for
said, the
sure.
book doesn't really have that. Which when I was like reading into stuff, a lot of people have commented on that the artwork is just kind of straightforward, like, oh, this is what
Mhm,
happened. There isn't much flair to it. Um,
mhm.
which I'm glad that Matthew Vaughn brought that to the movie.
Right, right.
All right, well, that was Kingsman: The Secret Service. Let us know in the comments what you thought of at least our summary of the book, and if you want to read it for yourself, I'll leave the Amazon link to the trade paperback, the graphic novel, in the
Mhm.
description. Um, but yeah, like it was definitely interesting, and as like a fan of the movie, I think it
Right.
was fun to read, just kind of know like what the source
Mhm,
material was.
mhm,
But to wrap things up, let's do our cultured picks.
mhm.
This week I had Titans Beast World number
Uh,
6, the finale of the whole Beast World story arc. And I will say about this, like, I did enjoy a lot of it, but I do feel like some of it, like, I do feel like some of it was kind of anticlimactic.
mm,
So obviously big spoilers for this book and the end of Beast World, but there's this kind of like this whole build up, the whole thing where the Garo spores were attaching themselves to people and turning them into animals, and at the end it's basically just the Titans kind of realize that the spores are attractive to people who are more powerful
mm,
beings. So they basically just send like their heavy hitters to just go like attract all the spores and then kill them. And
mhm.
they kind of just do it so quickly. Like, I mean, like it makes sense, and it makes sense in the story, but I feel like it just kind of happens so quickly and almost kind of easily that I was like,
Right,
huh.
right.
Also, for some reason, it's like only the Titans by the end, even though there were
Mm,
other like characters, like all the main DC characters were involved. They just kind of had the Titans were the only ones actually doing a lot of the like most of the work by the end.
mhm.
I feel like maybe they were trying a little hard to like make it that like, oh, the Titans are the Justice League now. Whereas like I
Right,
feel like
right.
there's so many other characters that could have been helping that they didn't really show that much.
Mhm.
Um But it was still a pretty cool ending, and they did bring back Beast Boy, unsurprisingly. But I did like the way they do it. They did
Mhm.
it, and he's not exactly the same. Like, because at first it's like the spores have his part of his consciousness, and they started collecting them instead of killing them, and then they find like another big piece of like his arm that got cut off, like the big Starro arm, and they kind of meld that back into him, and he's,
Mhm.
I guess,
Mhm.
mostly back at the end. But then there's also the twist ending, which I found most interesting, where there's this big fight between Raven and her demon self, who was Doctor Hate, and she attempts to trap her demon self back into the ruby that's on her forehead. But it turns out that it's actually her demon self that traps her in the
Mhm.
end, and she's like masquerading as Raven, so none of the other Titans know that she's actually the demon
Mhm.
self Raven. So very, and it seems like they're definitely setting her up as the next big Titans villain
Yeah. Yeah.
going forward, and I'm curious to see what happens with that.
Mhm.
If she's kind of like gonna be like a new Trigon almost, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I thought it's pretty cool. A little bit like for how much the build up, I felt like it was over kind of quick, but
Mhm.
I did still enjoy it.
Yeah. My pick this week, I think it's called Trinity Special Number One, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think this is a collection of various segments from other comics. And it's basically focusing on, uh, I didn't even know this character existed, but it's focusing on Diana's Wonder Woman's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth, and like
Okay.
her adventures with John and Damien. And it kind of starts out, the first story is when she's like a little baby and they're all
Mm,
kind of kids, but then like throughout the issue, eventually they're like in the future and like Damien's Batman and
mm,
John's, I mean, he's Superman now, but he's like the main Superman. And
right.
then
Right.
she's like Wonder Woman, and so it's
Interesting.
kind of cool. I didn't, like I said before, I didn't know this character existed, but
Me neither.
it's interesting to see
Huh.
her and interacting with the other two children of the
Yeah.
Trinity. So,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They're like the new Trinity. So what's
yeah,
so she's called Wonder Woman.
in the future,
Right.
yes, but I don't know what her superhero name is like in the present. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So like I saw this book advertised, and I thought
Hmm.
that her character name was Trinity. I was like, huh. Okay, that's weird. So, but I
Yeah,
see that. Okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
I don't know who the father is, but
Oh,
she's
so
Wonder
they
Woman's daughter.
don't say.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. 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 All right.
Yeah.
Well, that brings our show to a close this week. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you would like to support us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/theculturednerd and look for our show specific tier. Thanks to all of the current Patreon supporters of The Cultured Nerd: Wesley H., Mitch S., Connor Y., Anna M., Oscar B., Craig L., and Salib K. I've been your host, Michael Malillo. My co host, as usual, is Luke S.
Mhm.
Our logo was designed by Jose Navarro, and our intro was designed by myself. Thank you again for joining us. You can check us out on social media, pretty much just Instagram right now at The Cultured
Mhm.
Polist. You can access that by scanning the QR code on the bottom left. And you can check out Casual Experts, me and Luke's other brand, and our other podcast. We have our own Casual Experts YouTube channel. All that you
Mhm.
can get from the QR code on the bottom right.